Hi, and welcome to Oppida Live's rerun of Constructive Alignment in Action. This Oppida Live was originally run on April the 20th, and this is a re-record of the presentation section. So let's start by taking a look at what we mean by constructive alignment, and also how learning designers can use this as the foundation of a learning design for an online learning experience that's coherent and of high quality. We're also going to take a look finally at some of the challenges that arise with constructive alignment and how we can overcome these. But first, a story about learning. Now, as a child, I used to love a trip to the library. So Saturday morning, I had a relative who would take me in the car and we'd have a little trip to the library. So I had my 6 little tickets and I could choose anything I liked as long as they were from the children's section. Now, some of the books I wanted to read and learn from were in the adult section. So as a special treat, my relative would let me use their tickets. And so I could double up and I had 12 books that I could take out. So on a Saturday, I would get home from the library and I would spread all of these books all around me on the living room floor. And I was so excited about what I was going to read first and what I was going to learn next. I even had the TV in the background with my favourite show on, and I created myself this wonderful little environment. Now, even back then, there were constraints. So I had fixed library opening times. Even with my extra tickets, there was a fixed number of tickets. There was a fixed hire period, and even TV times were fixed. So if I didn't catch my show on a Saturday, I wouldn't be able to catch it at any other time. So external factors provided constraints as to what, when, where, and how much information we could access. So if we take this now into today, we now have 24/7 access to information, with multitasking being the norm, albeit doing it pretty badly. We have multiple open tabs, working with multiple devices, and information on demand. So similar really to being surrounded by all of those books, but without constraints. Now, if we think about this lack of external constraints and how that relates to our learners and education, well, self-directed learners will be accessing the internet to access information that they need for their learning. But it's up to them to decide where they go, how much information they access. They evaluate the source. Is it a credible source? Is it relevant? What time do they log on? What time do they log off? We have a constant, online non-stop culture. And with all of these decisions and evaluation, we can be increasing the cognitive load due to all these decisions that we're having to make. So things sometimes feel more difficult because we're having to make all these multiple decisions about what, when, how, and where without any constraints. But surely this can be a good thing in one way. Now let's consider the online learner. Now very often an online course will be designed, but often delivered without any tutor support. So there may not be a facilitator present or a tutor. So we need to enable that learner to not go under a complete cognitive load overload and be able to have clear signposting, understand what they've signed up for, understand the relevance of activities, and understand how they're going to complete their assessment. So they should feel prepared. So looking at John Sweller's extraneous cognitive load, again here, now the extraneous cognitive load is the effort involved in completing a task separate to the learning content. So if we design a learning experience whereby learners are jumping in and out of a platform or a course, having to log into multiple systems, the instructions aren't clear, it makes for a bumpy learning experience. So we try to remove the extraneous cognitive load to make things only as complicated as they need to be. So constructive alignment itself, now that this term was first used by John Biggs in the 90s, and essentially it's an approach to design whereby all of the outcomes that we set up are aligned with the teaching and learning activities. So the outcomes inform the activities. So everything that a learner does within the course should clearly link back to the outcomes. So when they're carrying out an activity, it should be really crystal clear as to why they're doing it. They can see the relevance because they can see that it links back to the outcomes that they signed up for in the first place. Now, at the end here, we have assessment. So the assessment is, of course, linked to the outcomes, but also to the activities. So when a learner gets to the assessment stage, they feel prepared to complete the assessment and they understand what it is that's expected of them because they've been preparing for that through these relevant activities that they've been completing throughout their learning experience. Now, the idea being that if a learner understands what's expected of them, they can see the relevance of the activities and they're prepared for the assessment, they feel more motivated to learn and to complete. Now, as a solid foundation for learning design, from a learner's perspective, they understand the outcomes, they know what they're going to learn. The activities, they understand the relevance, and the assessment, they understand what they need to do. So on the subject of relevance, let's just explore a little optional activities. Now, if we have activities that are just in there because they're nice to have or little extras, if they're not relevant, many of our learners are time pressured. So they may simply decide that I'm just going to skip it. If it's not relevant to me, I'm going to skip. In the same sort of thread, when we get to assessment, there should be no surprises. We understand what it is that we're going to be assessed on because we understand the assessment linked back to the outcomes and the activities that we have been carrying out. So everything is clear. So let's not include things like, busy work. So if things aren't essential and they're maybe nice to have, so they don't link, then maybe we don't have those in there in the first place. Now, the best way to explore this is through an example. Now, constructive alignment is something we use here at Oppida, and this is part of our learning design practitioner micro-credential. So it's an actual storyboard outline. And this relates to Learning by 2, which is learning designers as planners. So you'll see here on the left-hand side, we start off with our learning outcome, so a broad learning outcome. And you'll see here, this one is actually all about constructive alignment and the planning process. Now, objectives go down to a more granular level, and they use Bloom's taxonomy to explain how it is that we're going to address that learning outcome in more detail. So we move through the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy, and you'll see there produce, apply, explain, identify, describe. We're using those action verbs. Now, as learning designers, we need those objectives, we need those outcomes. As a learner, you don't really want to see just an objective as a heading in a course and then some content underneath it. So we can have that underneath as our structure, as our foundation. But for learners, we can group into topics, and then we put in different, more kind of narrative headings for our teaching and learning activities. So here you'll see in the topic column, we've got 3 topics, and you'll see in the how section, the how section explains how we're going to address that topic and how it links back to the outcomes. So our headings in our online course, be it in Canvas or Moodle or Rise, it doesn't really matter which platform we're designing with in mind in the end. We have how to write effective learning outcomes. So that might be a heading. Now, that links back to Learning Bytes Objective 2.1, which you can see in the objectives column, linking back to Learning Outcome 2. Sometimes if we're working with a subject matter expert, who may be producing storyboard content that we then work with, we can create an outline with a subject matter expert, and we might take this down into even more detail. So underneath here, in how to write effective learning outcomes, in the first stages in this outline, we could say, well, here we're going to include 1 times graphic, we're going to have 1 times video, we're going to have 1 times case study. And then when the SME is then providing us with the raw information that we need to finish off, polish the course, design it, and put all the structure in, they know what it is that they need to provide us with. So yes, here, knowledge check. Now we're using a multiple choice method of assessment. So we're using it so that obviously it's automatically marked, and we ensure that learners get feedback following the completion of the knowledge check. Sometimes multiple choice questions get open to criticism because of only accessing lower order action verbs in Bloom's taxonomy due to their design. So if they're oversimplified in their methodology, it is really just, which one of these is A, B, C, or D. So one way of working around that is to use more scenarios and case studies, and then that enables you with your multiple choice answers to ensure that somebody can then apply their knowledge by choosing correct responses with relevant distractors from the multiple choice options that's far more complex, accesses the higher order verbs rather than just being more of a tick box. But here you'll see again the knowledge check column. You can see clearly the objective that maps back to. So in our knowledge checks, there should be no random surprise. I'm sure we've all seen these from time to time when you get to do a knowledge check and some rogue question pops up and you think, where even has that come from? I've not seen that anywhere in the course. And then you find it maybe tucked away in page 72 of the learner guide, or not at all. But everything in the knowledge check, the assessment, should be linked back to the activities, the content, and the outcomes that were stated in the first place. So it's a little like a golden thread that runs through your entire course to ensure this coherent learning experience. So appreciating that was quite a detailed screen, this is just the breakdown. So to recap, we start with the outcome, broken down into more granular objectives. Here we have topics, so we have 3 topics and how we're going to approach that, and then these they turn into sections of courses, again with more catchy titles. Learning design principles, accessibility and inclusive design. Okay. And again, the assessment, and again, you can see here more clearly the mapping and how it goes back to each of these. And we would ensure that we don't just cover an objective once, so that it's more of a robust assessment. So to wrap up here then, so what are the key challenges for learning designers? Now, obviously to undertake a constructive alignment approach to learning design, it can be more time consuming because of having to ensure that everything does align and we don't end up with content that's within the course that just doesn't map backwards or forwards to the assessment. The resistance to change comes in when perhaps you can be working with an SME who hasn't used this approach before. So it can look like we're being very specific as to our approach. So sometimes you have to take your SME on this journey with you and understand that they will be needing to learn the importance of the outcomes, so that when they provide the raw content to you, you make sure that everything that is provided clearly maps. Otherwise, you can end up with extra content that you look and think, it's great, but it actually doesn't relate to what we said we were going to achieve in the first place. On a practical level, if that ever happens and you do have some content that arrives and you think, well, it looks amazing, the content is great, but it doesn't map back, that would warrant some conversation with the SME and perhaps even revisiting of the outcomes, because it may be a case that the outcomes need to be tailored if the content that's arrived isn't as you expected and it's that good. But not the other way around. We wouldn't just fit things in just to make it work. Everything for a reason. Now, ensuring coherence. Again, our learner is walking through this course solo, so we need to they need to be able to understand clearly what's expected, where they need to go, and what they need to do. In a classroom environment, well, we can flex, can't we? We read the room, we can see how people are progressing, and we can change our approach, we can add content, we can differentiate completely on the fly. And we can't do that when we're not present in this online space. So for the learner, to reduce that cognitive load and make things manageable, we've got our constructively aligned approach, and we also make sure that our signposting is super clear and we have clear calls to action. So if a learner has to read something or discuss or to reflect or to explore, we can use common calls to action that signpost the learner to what it is that we're expecting of them. So this balance in flexibility and structure links us to the subject of context. Now, when we create an online learning experience, the last thing we really want is for it to be beautifully aligned, but so rigid that it doesn't allow for any flexibility or the inclusion of a learner's own context in the activities. So this is down to us as a learning designer, and what we can do is when we're writing our activities, always give the option for a learner to apply something to their own context or their own previous experience. So that gives us the ability to balance that flexibility and structure. Now, case studies are also useful here because you can't rely that a learner has any context that they can add. So if somebody has not entered the workplace yet, we can't set an activity that says, consider your current job role, because then you're excluding some learners from that part of the activity. So sometimes you can provide a case study as a backup and then also give the ability to apply to own context. The upside being that learners can actually generate something useful. There might be an activity where they're creating a blog that they can then share online, or something that they can use to share information with their team. The final thing here is, again, that marking of online assessment and providing timely feedback. In online courses where a tutor isn't present and often there isn't a marker available due to resource constraints, we have to look at what we can achieve using the tools we have available and online assessment methods that we can use. So again, this leads us very often back to the use of multiple choice questions. However, multiple choice questions, when written well, and we get into the detail of them, they can be more effective than the basic tick box style ones. So they need further investigation, but they can be used effectively. And timely feedback in any quizzes that you have for summative assessment, in your like the end of course check, that would be summative assessment, or if you've got some activities that lead to feedback for formative assessments, so assessment for learning, always look at opportunities within the tools that you have available to provide feedback. And we always go beyond, correct, incorrect, why was it correct, why wasn't it? The taking of a quiz or any test is still learning. If you get it wrong, you should understand, you learn from that experience. So yes, so look for feedback options in your tools. So that brings us to the wrap up here now. If you are interested in reading more about constructive alignment, we have the book link and John Biggs' website there that you could take a look at. And a final thanks to Image Credits. And thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Oppida Live.